You've been here before, right?
A few days ago, yes.
Tell me your name.
My name is Darren.
Darren?
Yes.
Yes, Darren.
Thank you for giving these talks. Could you please talk to us a bit about the term sacred sexuality and how we as people and a culture can reconnect with this in a society maybe where it has become superficial or toxic or dangerous?
This term sacred sexuality has developed its own meaning in today's day and age, mainly derived from the neo-tantric practices. Some of these neo-tantric practices actually speak about the male and the female connecting with each other through awareness practices and moving away from a result-oriented sexuality or a culmination-oriented sexuality into a sexuality which is about this moment. So these neo-tantric practices have as their aim a sort of a joining or a maithuna in Sanskrit, where the important thing is communication rather than fulfilling of desire. Sacred sexuality goes even beyond that, at least as spoken about over here. So what in the first line is sacred when a male and a female come together is that they have a chance to communicate with each other on largely 6 levels. So they have the chance to communicate with each other in the actual physical, because they touch each other. They have the chance to communicate with each other in the emotional, where there is an emotional communication happening in every moment of that sexual communion, let's say. Then there is also the conceptual part of their beings that have to connect in those moments, where even in the thought processes it is about communicating with the other. Then in that sexual communion there is the creative aspect, which is how to communicate creatively in such a way that the other actually is involved in that communication, is responding creatively as well. Then there is the unity consciousness. When each tunes into the other, in that unity consciousness, there is an experience of total oneness. So that is another area of communication. And then the one that is connected with this chakra over here is when the male and the female are seeing each other as gods. Gods that are able to experience the present, the past, and the future in that given moment. So it is a communion that happens when both have the consciousness vibrating in this chakra. Having said that, what also leads to this sacred sexuality is if each of these male and female are really deeply and clearly in tune with themselves. So only when you are deeply in tune with self, when you're in self-realization in that process, will you be able to tune into the other. Because the self of the other and the self that you are actually of the same material. So tuning into the self, this is the most important of all the practices, because that is what actually gives you the key to tuning into the other. The thing is also that when a male, for example, tunes in to the source, to his soul, the female face of that soul shows him, guides him how to be with the female outside. So obviously his communication in that sacred sexuality becomes even more sacred. And the same, by the way, of course, applies to the female, and her communication with her soul or self will lead her to be able to respond to that man and communicate with him. You also have the other aspect of sacred sexuality where the aim of that sexual connection is not for each to reach their culmination and move apart from each other, but to continue to grow in the communication with each other, which is achieved also if there is the retention of the seed in the male, of the semen, and in the female, the retention of the ejaculate. This is something which is important because that energy can be transmuted. And when it is transmuted, it moves up from layer of consciousness to the next, till it is able to express itself as pure love, which is actually what then brings the two together in a continual communion and not come together, reach a culmination, separate. Come together, reach a culmination, separate, but not really experience the other to that level of perfection. So, when one boils it all down to one word, it is communication. And where does that communication lead? It leads to union. There is no need for a separation. In sacred sexuality, there is no need for a separation in order to come back together, because the union is what is so powerful, the experience of the union. And one can train oneself to tune into the source through these practices. One can train oneself to retain and transmute through these practices. And that's why the fundamental statement or the fundamental phrase is surrender to love. Because when you surrender to love, you can surrender to love the other also. So that, in a nutshell, is what sacred sexuality would be about. And it's all really practicable. It's something you can actually practice, which leads to a continual union rather than the conventional coming together, separation, which does not lead in the long run to any deepening of knowledge of self and knowledge of the other.